Good evening, everyone. I'm Bruce Hoffman, and I'm the director of the Center for Jewish Civilization at Georgetown University. The CJC is particularly pleased to welcome all of you to this evening's annual Joint Department of Government Goldman Lecture, and also to the CJC's final public lecture of this semester. This evening's lecture is titled Arab Zionism and the Path to Peace. This event is something of a milestone in the history of the CJC. For more than 2 decades, mostly through the tireless work of Professor Emeritus Robert Lieber, one of the CJC's founders, Georgetown has been fortunate to host annually a distinguished Israeli academician, government figure, or public intellectual through the endowment generously provided by the Goldman family. Until now, the visiting Israeli Goldman Professorship resided in the university's Department of Government only. But this year, for the first time, the Goldman Professor holds a joint appointment in both the Department of Government and the CJC, and all the courses taught by the Goldman Professor this year and in the future are cross-listed with the CJC. We are therefore especially fortunate this year to have as our Goldman Visiting Professor someone who is uniquely an academician, a prominent government figure, and a public intellectual, Dr. Einat Wilf. Dr. Wilf is a leading authority on matters of foreign policy, economics, education, Israel, and Zionism. She was a member of the Israeli Knesset from 2010 to 2013, where she served both as chair of the Education Committee and as a member of the highly influential Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Dr. Wilf was herself born and raised in Israel. She served as an intelligence officer in the Israel Defense Forces and subsequently as foreign policy advisor to Vice Prime Minister Shimon Peres, and then as a strategic consultant with the international consulting firm McKinsey & Company. Dr. Wilf received her bachelor's degree from Harvard, an MBA from the renowned International Business School, INSEAD in France, and a PhD in political science from the University of Cambridge in England. She's the author of 6 books. They include My Israel, Our Generation, Back to Basics, How to Save Israeli Education at No Additional Cost, It's Not the Electoral System Stupid, which was published in Hebrew, and Winning the War of Words. Her 2 most recent books are Telling Our Story, a collection of Einat's essays on Israel, Zionism, and the Path to Peace, and The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream has obstructed the path to peace. As has been the case since we went virtual 18 months ago, throughout this evening's lecture, attendees may submit their questions for Dr. Wilf to the following email address, cjcinfo@georgetown.edu. That's cjcinfo@georgetown.edu. Also, please email that same address, cjcinfo@georgetown.edu, if you experience any technical difficulties. And now please join me in extending a warm virtual welcome, unfortunately not in person, to Dr. Einat Wilf, who will present this year's Goldman Lecture. Thank you so much, Einat, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Professor Hoffman, and thank you truly to the university and to the Center for Jewish Civilization for having me this year as a visiting professor. It's been a delightful experience. So today I would like to discuss a topic that has been on my mind for a few years now, but I think really became possible to talk about more openly and clearly in the last year since the Abraham Accords. And this is the changing attitudes across the Arab world towards Israel and the very idea of Zionism, the idea of Jewish self-determination in the land of Israel. So a few words about the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords signed nearly a year and a half ago between the UAE, the Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel, later to be joined by Morocco and Sudan. At the beginning, when they were signed, although there was fanfare and ceremony during the signature, it felt that there was almost a concerted effort in many places to downplay the significance of those accords. Now, I understand the domestic considerations and the desire to not acknowledge that President Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu have done anything good. And I can understand the skepticism in the beginning, but after a year and a half, I don't think it's warranted anymore. So some of the comments in the beginning were things like, this is not even important. At the end of the day, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco are not countries that have a border or have engaged directly in war with Israel, especially discussing the UAE and Bahrain. Those are small countries. They're not important in the Arab world. This was merely a transactional process. This is a bribe. They got airplanes, and therefore this is what it's all about. And those were some of the comments downplaying the significance of these accords. I want to argue, and certainly from the position we have now, that these accords have been transformational and have transformational potential. Because while it's true that all the transactional elements are there, the UAE and Bahrain are concerned about Iran. They see Israel as an ally. They were able to get, with Morocco, they were able to get things from the United States. All these transactional arguments are true. And yet they do not explain the kind of the intensity and the nature and the tone of the accords. Now, just to compare them, for many, many years, Israelis were told that the best, the absolute best they could hope for, as long as the Palestinian issue was not resolved, in terms of a peace agreement, is what they have with Egypt and Jordan. Egypt, which signed the peace agreement in 1979 based on the land for peace formula of Israel handing over the Sinai Peninsula and signing a peace agreement with Egypt, and then in 94 with Jordan. Now, both of these agreements, even though they were officially called peace agreements, they had very little peaceful content. They were excellent security arrangements, absolutely, and they're well understood as non-belligerency agreements, but kind of barely any diplomatic relations, no cultural relations, no tourism, no warmth. Egypt and Jordan continued to be some of the leaders of anti-Israel resolutions in international bodies. Egypt continued to be the #1 producer and promoter of anti-Semitic content in Arabic to the Arab world. But this is what Israelis were told. This is peace. That's it. As far as you're concerned, Israel, this is what peace looks like, as long as you do not resolve the Palestinian issue. Along come the Abraham Accords, and there's nothing standoffish about the Accords. As soon as they were signed, you could see the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco going all in. You saw it in the tone, in the warmth, and as I said, by now we have a year and a half, which literally every day, my Twitter feed has heavy Abraham Accords content. Every day, something is signed. There is a high-level visit, there is a signing of an accord on agriculture or a space program or any kind of technology cooperation. And of course, tourism. One of the first markers was the Emirates, the airline landing in Israel. Now, I have to share with you a bit a kind of the role of the Emirates in the Israeli imagination, just so you understand how big a symbol it was. Emirates was always this Shangri-La airline that had a mythical first class that Israelis would never be able to travel in. And not only can we travel in, it lands in Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport. And the pilot is thrilled to land, and Israelis are visiting Dubai and they're welcomed. The sense of the lifting of the siege was palpable. And so every day you have these kind of agreements and warm relations and the ambassadors every day talking about what they're doing, certainly not the standoffish agreements that we were told to expect of the like of Egypt and Jordan. But it's not just even those issues, all the cooperation in technology and agriculture and space programs. What began to change was also the ideas, the ideology. One of the first things that the UAE immediately did after signing the accords was change the books in order to portray a far more positive image of Israel and the story of Jews in the region. I became part of various WhatsApp and Zoom groups of Israelis and Emiratis and Bahrainis. Now, I can tell you that during the first meeting of this WhatsApp group of Israelis and Emiratis and Bahrainis, the Israelis were very concerned because we were told, okay, there's going to be this Zoom meeting. And again, what we expected is that there were going to be 50 Israelis and maybe one Emirati brave enough to be there. Because again, that has been the traditional dynamic, very much portrayed. And when you see Israeli judo champions kind of putting their hand to shake the hand of, let's say, an Arab competitor and being rebuffed. So traditionally, Israelis were used to in international conferences being rebuffed by Arab colleagues. And we expected the same thing, kind of the eager attitude from Israel and a standoffish attitude from the Arab side. That's not what happened. Many Emiratis and Bahrainis came on the Zoom discussion. It was a wonderful discussion. It continued many weeks after. They expressed true interest in Israel. And for me, what was interesting is that they wanted to understand specifically more about Zionism. In a bit of a mirror image of kind of young American Jews saying, oh, we were lied about Israel, they were saying, we feel that we were lied about Israel and we want to understand more about Israel and Zionism. And I ended up in a subsequent Zoom talk giving a talk about Zionism and what it means. And this was to an Arab audience that wanted to understand, not to kind of needle me and disprove. They really wanted to understand what it's all about. They were very receptive. They were very positive. So much so that after that talk, I ended up co-authoring an op-ed with two young Emiratis, a man and a woman. And the op-ed opens this way: we are proud Arabs, we are proud Muslims, and we are Zionists. They did not shy away from the word. And in the op-ed, they say, we see absolutely no contradiction between Arab history, between Islamic history, and supporting the Jewish right to self-determination in their homeland, aka Zionism. We do not see a contradiction, if anything, the opposite. And the fact that they were young matters, because one of the things that emerged is that this is a generational shift. When people began to say, oh, the UAE is unimportant, it's a small country, what they neglected to notice is that the UAE punches well above its weight in the Arab world. For 10 years running now, the UAE represents the place that young Arabs want to come and work. And why? Because it represents success. It represents the future. I'm sure you all remember after 9/11, after what happened with the Arab Spring, so much of the discourse was about Arab failure and Arab deficit and Arab backwardness. And suddenly from within the Arab world, the UAE, Bahrain, were projecting an image of success, of confidence, the gleaming skyscrapers, the branches of international universities and museums, a space program. And this was an image of what an Arab successful future looks like. And part of this package of the gleaming skyscrapers and the international universities and the space program is normalization with Israel. It's just part of the package of what an Arab successful future looks like. And you're really feeling that from the young people. That's the future they want to belong to. And they even spoke in those generational terms. They spoke about Arab anti-Zionism as something that belongs to the past. They said things like, oh, those are my parents, my grandparents. Yeah, they were enamored with Nasser. This kind of notion that this belongs to ancient history. That's not for us. For us, the gleaming future is part of embracing Israel. Israel is modern. Israel has technology. Israel is something that we can appreciate in the region. And it began also transformation of the discussion of not just Israel, but Zionism. And of course, the first clue you have is the name, Abraham Accords. You cannot find a more succinct way of flipping the entire narrative, the entire historical Arab and Islamic narrative about Israel and Zionism than choosing the word Abraham. The traditional Arab and Islamic narrative with respect to Israel, and I'm under no illusions, this is still the dominant view and narrative of the Arab world, says that Israel is a foreign implant. Israel is a foreign settler, colonialist, white, crusader implant that has no connection to the region. The Jews are not a people, they have no history in the land, complete denial of any connection. And of course, the implication is that if the Jews are, or if Israel and Zionism are a foreign colonial implant in the region, the best way to address them is by pushing them out, because that's what you do with foreign implants. When you call a normalization agreement with Israel, Abraham, you're flipping this entire narrative. You're basically saying, Abraham, our joint father, our joint ancestor, we are appealing to the scriptures to say Islam respects, of course, all scriptures, and we acknowledge that the Jewish people have a history in the region, that the Jewish people belong here, that they're not foreigners, that they're not an implant, and we are embracing them as a sovereign people, not as a subjugated minority, but as a people who are sovereign in their own state and have the legitimacy to be sovereign in their own state. So even just the name of the Accords, Abraham, is an entire flipping of the narrative towards basically a support of Zionism by the Arab world, by Islam. And Islam is important here because the UAE is looking at this as part of a broader battle for the soul of Islam against ISIS, against Iran. They're not just talking about security issues. They're talking about whose model of Islam is going to be the model of the future. And they're going, UAE and Bahrain and Morocco are going out of their way to say, our vision of Islam is tolerant, is open, is moderate, is not anti-Zionist. And as part of that, one of the things you're seeing is a complete embrace and celebration of Jewish life in those countries. Now, as I'm sure you can guess, there's barely any Jewish life to speak of in the UAE and Bahrain, very little in Morocco. But as part of this transformation, whatever Jewish life they have, they're embracing. And again, my Twitter feed is now full of celebrations of all Jewish holidays happening in UAE and Bahrain with Emirati and Bahraini officials, really kind of saying in their first Jewish wedding, and they're very happy about it. And it really works together because given that I'm teaching a course here in Georgetown on Zionism and anti-Zionism, I'm the first who can make the theoretical argument that anti-Zionism is not necessarily anti-Jewish, certainly not historically, but certainly since the establishment of the State of Israel, in practice it is. Every space, country, society, organization that have become virulently anti-Zionist have become hostile to Jews. This was definitely true of the Arab world. As soon as the Arab world turned anti-Zionist and anti-Zionism became a key feature of Arab ideology, the Jews were out within a few short years. the Soviet Union. We can talk about American campuses. In theory, anti-Zionism does not have to be hostile to Jews. In practice, it is. And you're seeing the reverse. When a country moves away from anti-Zionism to pro-Zionism, it also becomes hospitable to Jews. It embraces Jewish life. It works together. So this is what we're seeing, and it has a ripple effect. I'm already hearing from Arabs in other countries that are saying that the Abraham Accords have given them the confidence and the possibility to be pro-Israel or at least neutral. They don't have to profess hatred anymore as much. This even has impact within Israel, on Israel's Arab minority, on its Arab citizens, who also feel the sense of kind of integration into the region. We just heard that even the standoffish Jordan and Egypt are feeling the ripple effects. Jordan just signed a trilateral agreement with Israel and the UAE on exchange of water and electricity. And a Jordanian colleague of mine explained to me that as soon as you bring in the UAE, it enables Jordan to have these agreements with Israel, and somehow it's more politically palatable. Egypt was able to host Israel's Prime Minister Bennett, and for the first time in a while, actually hoist the Israeli flag. Just so you understand, a peace agreement where they couldn't show the flag. The Israeli flag and the picture with the flag appears in the front page of the paper. So this is also beginning to have ripple effects. So how does all of this relate at the end of the day to peace? Because I think what we're going to see is the beginning of the forging of finally a true path to peace. Now, depending on what your analysis of why we don't have peace, especially between Israel and the Palestinians, but even more broadly, you will have different conclusions. But as I write in my books and given my experience in the last few decades, at the end of the day, the conflict between Israel and the Arab world, and especially between Israel and the Palestinians, is actually quite simple. It's a conflict between Zionism and anti-Zionism. As Ernst Bevin, the British foreign minister after World War II, whom I'm sure you know was no friend to the Jews and no friend to Zionism, but amazingly, he understood the conflict. He goes to the British Parliament in February of 1947 to explain why Britain is reneging on the mandate given to it by the League of Nations and giving back the mandate to the heir to the United Nations. And he says His Majesty's government has come to the conclusion that in the land, the conflict is irreconcilable. He calls it irreconcilable. Why? He says there are Jews and Arabs in the land. There's no question about who the two people are, the Jews and the Arabs. And he says each one of them has this priority, what he calls the point of principle. For the Jews, the top priority is a state. The Jews want a state. And for the Arabs in the land, the top priority is for the Jews not to have a state. That's the conflict, and that's why it's irreconcilable. Because it's not about two national movements fighting over borders and how much land each is going to have. It's about one saying we want a state and the other saying you will not have a state. Now, it doesn't matter. You can think it's legitimate for the Arab side to deny Zionism or to deny the Jewish self-determination in any borders, but I think it would be very hard to deny that this is the essence of the conflict, regardless who you justify. If the conflict is between Zionism and anti-Zionism, then this is the one place that you cannot split the difference. You can divide the land, and you can divide resources and airspace, and you can make security arrangements, but you cannot split the ideological difference. At the end of the day, the conflict ends either by anti-Zionism gaining the upper hand, so there's no state of Israel, and we can discuss the variety of scenarios by which this could happen, or Zionism is allowed to stand and embraced by the Arab world. This is the only way, the only two ways in which the conflict ends. Obviously, I favor the way in which the state of Israel is allowed to stay as the sovereign state of the Jewish people. And therefore, I believe that there's no use beating about the bush. There's no question of details in this. It is a fundamental conflict about whether the Arab world and ultimately the Palestinians are willing to accept the legitimacy of a sovereign Jewish state in any borders whatsoever in the land. And I think at the end of the day, the more the Arab world begins to accept the Jews, to flip the narrative from the Jews as foreign invaders to a land to which they have no connection, to a people who are fundamentally at home and belong in the region, you create a path to peace by which it's understood that ultimately the Arab world will make peace with Israel as the sovereign state of the Jewish people and will end any hostile efforts, whether by terrorism or by war or by international condemnations, to remove it from the map. And we can even begin to see that change. Something that I believe should have been headline news, but passed completely under the radar, is when the Palestinians went to the Arab League to ask that the Arab League will censure the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco for normalizing relations with Israel. Now, they were very successful in doing so with Egypt, right? Egypt, not a small Arab country, the mother of nations, was thrown out of the Arab League for making that very standoffish peace with Israel. The UAE and Bahrain, with their very warm, all-in normalization agreements, what did the Arab League respond to the Palestinians? And remember, this is the Arab League, an organization whose very reason for being was organizing around anti-Zionism. What does the Arab League tell the Palestinians? They basically shrug their shoulders. They say the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, they're sovereign states, they can do whatever they want. An Arab colleague of mine called it the Brexit moment of the Arab League. The kind of understanding that those are sovereign states, they're not engaged anymore in this grand civilizational battle against the invading foreigners, they have other priorities, and move on. The tragedy and irony, of course, I think, is that at the moment that some of the Arab world is beginning to peel away its support for Palestinian rejectionism, for the vision of from the river to the sea, there are those in the West who rush in to fill the void, basically prolonging the conflict. So this is why I think we are witnessing a very interesting moment. About a few years ago, I'll end with that, I was asked to give a lecture in London for the 101st year of the Balfour Declaration. Now, initially I thought 101st year, what am I going to do with that? That's not an interesting year at all. But then I thought I will use it to discuss the next century. And my argument was this: the past century, since the Balfour Declaration, Christian Zionism was incredibly important for the establishment and the thriving of the state of Israel. I doubt that Israel and the Jewish people, given their small numbers, would have been able to pull it off without this Christian sentiment, Zionist sentiment support in countries like the UK and later in the US. And again, this happened in Christianity, a system of thought that for millennia, I mean, for centuries for sure, was based on the idea that the destruction of Zion is a theological imperative, a demonstration of God's wrath against the people that he no longer has chosen. And Zionism was able to emerge in Christianity, and we all know the background and Reformation and all that. But I believe there is nothing to prevent the emergence of a similar pro-Zionist sentiment in the Arab and Islamic world. There's enough in the background, in the history, in the scriptures to create that kind of sentiment. And I think we're now at a moment where a lot of transactional interests are meeting with this ideological change, which I believe that if it is allowed to continue, will ultimately result in true peace. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Einat. That was a great and uplifting end to, I think, what has been a tough year for many of us. So it's nice to have some good news. I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions, and in fact, I already see them coming in. But let me start to get things rolling. What about Saudi Arabia? Do you think that there's a possibility that Saudi Arabia could be the next country, or perhaps in different circumstances might indeed have been the next country to join the Abraham Accords? And would that also be a seismic change or a game changer in this process?
So I can't bet about when Saudi will come in, and I doubt it will be the next. Probably it will prefer to green light a couple more countries before it's next, like Oman or but there's no doubt that if Saudi normalizes those relations and joins the Abraham Accords, we can officially declare the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict, because that would be truly transformational. Saudi, because of its history, can speak to Arab history, that's the source of it, can speak to Islamic ideas. That would truly, I think, mark the definite end of the Arab-Israeli conflict and would bring us, in my view, incredibly close to peace, even with the Palestinians, forcing a reckoning, an understanding that something fundamental has changed in the very perception of the idea of Jewish self-determination in the land. But Saudi is very much aware of how valuable it is in this process. So it's not likely to do it lightly or for nothing. And I have some colleagues in DC who are telling me that the list of requests from the US has already been submitted. But it's definitely something that is happening. And even with Saudi, every day we get little signals of warming up. One of the things that even started a few years ago that I thought was great was a Saudi think tank published an essay, a recommendation, talking about the fact that it's time for Saudi to begin to think of normalizing relations with Israel. And one of the messages there was that the Jewish people are a tribe of the region. And I thought that there's no higher compliment from a Saudi than to call the Jewish people a fellow tribe. This is another way of saying you belong. We recognize you as something that is not foreign to this place, but actually belongs here. So every day there are little indications of progress, but my guess is that the full going in will happen when they feel that they got it at a fair price.
Right. We're starting to get lots of questions. So let me wrap up kind of my warm-up questions, but they're questions I really want to ask. So this is the privilege of the chair. So there are some cynics who argue that the Abraham Accords is really just ephemeral and it's a product of a rather unique concatenation of circumstances. The world turned upside down by COVID, a very profound change, some would argue, in US foreign policy, the end of the war on terror, for example, which also translates to a diminishment of US engagement and interest in the Middle East, a rising threat from Iran, and potentially now a nuclear Iran. So if the Abraham Accords, I mean, what about the security dimension? Is this only because there's a lack of faith and trust in the United States and a fear of Iran? And if any of those dynamics change, could that also scuttle the Abraham Accords? Or from what you've said, I believe that you think that it's that this is something that's not ephemeral and that has a permanency about it that is really quite alluring.
So clearly the security issue is the driving issue, not just Iran, but what you pointed to, that the United States is basically, let's not say completely getting out of the region, but really reducing its footprint in a very serious way. And this is the one foreign policy that is actually consistent from Obama to Trump to Biden. America is reducing its footprint. This is something that all players in the region are clearly aware of. And what you're seeing in many ways is the region responding to it by creating its own alliances, by responding to its own challenges. Again, a colleague that I spoke to yesterday talked about how in many ways there's great disappointment from this administration and not kind of pushing more on the Abraham Accords, but that at the end of the day, what you're seeing is that the local players are not waiting for the United States. They are getting in and in deeper, even when the United States is actually sitting on the fence at this point. But clearly the bigger change is the reduction of the American footprint in the region. That's not likely to change anytime soon. The issue of Iran is not likely to change anytime soon. I completely agree that the initial driver is the security arrangement of everything else. But if it were only that, you would not have seen all the things that I talk about. Because countries do not go around, or, they could have gone with the Jordanian or Egyptian model, kind of saying, we're having the security arrangements, but Israel is really the most awful thing that has ever been on this planet. But that's not what they did. They went all in because I think it's not just about Israel, not just about American foreign policy, not just about Iran. It is about the projection of a new Arab and Islamic identity. It is about the battle for a certain form of Islam against other forces of Islam. It is about the projection of a successful Arab future in which normalization with Israel is part of it. And maybe I'll add here, some of the people who probably noticed a few weeks ago, there was a declaration by Iraqis that was done in Iraqi Kurdistan, but they were not Kurds. And they made a very interesting distinction. They talked about their desire for Iraq to normalize relations with Israel. And they said, we see the Arab world now divided between the world of war and the world of peace. This has resonance in general in Islamic thinking about the division between the world of war and the world of peace. And they say, we see the countries of war, Syria and Lebanon and Yemen and Libya. And they said, we don't want to be like them. And we see countries of peace like the UAE and Bahrain that are reaping the benefits. That's what we want. So you're really beginning to see also this battle within the Arab world for the soul of Islam about what is success, what is tolerance, where do we want to go? And as I said, I'm under no illusions, the dominant narrative in the Arab world is still anti-Zionist, is still that Israel is a foreign implant. But for the first time ever, we have a confident, prominent alternative voice that is having ripple effects.
Great. Well, let me go to the questions because they're starting to mount up. And actually, one of our very perceptive audience members raises, I think, exactly the one that your talk also addressed, but only glancingly. But this is the Palestinians. So this question is: you point to the thawing of Arab anti-Zionism around the region, as shown by the Accords, but is there evidence Palestinian anti-Zionism has waned at all? How much do Palestinians themselves care what the larger narrative is in the Arab world? And how much power would the larger Arab world have to tip the scales if the Palestinian streak continues to be defined by staunchly anti-Zionist extremist groups like Hamas, which garner much more respect today, even in the West Bank, than the relatively more moderate Palestine Authority?
So there's no evidence of change among the Palestinians, and I will argue that they will be the last to change. Because even though anti-Zionism was a central element of Arab identity in the last 80 years, at least, there is a long Arab history that can live without it. And this is what my co-writers of the op-ed, when they spoke about being a proud Arab and being proud of Arab culture and Arab history, they spoke about the fact that Arab identity does not need anti-Zionism in order to stand. The Palestinian identity, because it developed in a particular context, is much more about anti-Zionism. I would say in many ways, it's almost the entirety of that identity. So for the Palestinians to finally accept that their purpose should be to build a state next to Israel and not instead of it, they have to change their very identity, their very ethos. Now, those changes don't happen easily. They don't happen because they heard a great lecture by Einat. They happen over time and under duress, but they do happen. And they happen when there is a fundamental acceptance that all other options have been exhausted. That's why sometimes I call the conflict a battle of mutual exhaustion. Who will exhaust whom first? The Arabs and the Palestinians will exhaust the Jews to give up on Zionism? Are we going to say, look, it's not worth it, all these wars and terrorism and international condemnations, and we're out of here? So will they exhaust us into doing that? And if you listen, for example, to Nasrallah's speeches from Lebanon, that's always the theme. The theme is, look, the Zionist entity is weak, we're winning, and they're going to disappear soon. This is always the Iranian theme. Or will we exhaust the Arab world to finally accepting that they have misdiagnosed us all these decades as foreigners, and that we're actually home, that we are a people with a deep historical and cultural connection that will not go back anywhere else? Now, the Palestinians will not accept this until they have exhausted all other options. Now, Arab support for Palestinian intransigence and rejectionism has been critical for their ability to say no. Otherwise, this is a very small people in a very small conflict. If the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were ever truly only the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, well, that conflict is over in April 1948. Pretty much that part of the war is over. Then it becomes the Arab-Israeli conflict with the invasion of 7 Arab armies. And that becomes kind of the Arab anti-Zionism and the Arab blank check for Palestinian intransigence, perpetual refugeehood, and all these issues. If you begin to peel away the Arab support, then the Palestinians will increasingly have to reckon with their true size as a small people. And this is why I said that it's tragic that, and you're seeing them right now turn very powerfully, looking for this Western support for their cause, hoping it will replace the kind of the peeling away of the Arab sign. But if that doesn't happen, and the Palestinians ultimately have to reckon with their true size, I think the reckoning will, over time, not quickly, I call myself a long-term optimist, over time, we'll have to forge a new ethos. And then we can make peace.
Well, let me test your optimism by channeling the next question. I mean, are we not at a point in time now where the West is more anti-Zionist than parts of the Arab and Muslim worlds are? I mean, is this the ironic situation that we're in now? And what about those countries currently sitting on the fence, considering joining the Abraham Accords? Are they more vulnerable because of the kind of sentiments to joining, because of the kind of sentiments they see and read about in the West about Israel and Zionism?
So when I give my slightly less optimistic talk, the title is Arabzionism and Western Anti-Zionism. And I do highlight the starkly different directions in which those societies are heading. And I make the argument that if Western anti-Zionism really cared about peace in the region, then we wouldn't see this kind of going in such different directions. You would see at least a celebration of this true progress. And the fact that they're going in such different directions, in my analysis, actually points to issues domestically in the West, in America, in Europe, that are being somehow projected onto the region, but are not really about the region or not really about Israeli policy. Now, it's true that this is having an effect, This is tragic because, as I said, this actually extends the conflict. And at the end of the day, the people who pay for this kind of continued fueling of Palestinian rejectionism are all of us in the region, not the people who are talking or writing about it in the West. So for me, that's a terrible and tragic phenomena, and I talk about it in many other contexts. But given that as a whole, the United States is reducing its footprint in the region, even though Western anti-Zionism is certainly not helping promote the Abraham Accords, generally, I think more and more of the kind of the balance of weight of decision-making and initiative is actually moving to the region itself, rather than wait for it to come from Washington or London or Paris.
Let me also interpret another question a little bit. What about inside Israel amongst non-Jews there, particularly the Druze, Arab Christians, or Palestinian Christians who are residents of Israel? What's their attitude to the Abraham Accords?
So here you also see, very interestingly, the ripple effect, because even about small issues, hearing the Arabic language everywhere. If historically the sense, I, as an Israeli Jew, would go somewhere, let's say I'm abroad and I hear Arabic, my initial response is, okay, I should be careful, I should not speak Hebrew. Now I'm thinking, hey, they might be our friends. So that also has the effect of generally reducing tensions. You're seeing, and this is also a long process, of more and more of Israel's Arab citizens claiming proudly their Israeli identity. Again, I'm under no illusions. There's a very strong contingent of Israeli Arab citizens who view themselves as Palestinians, as Palestinian nationalists, who reject the idea of a Jewish state and view their being citizens of Israel as a temporary aberration in their history, and the idea that the land will revert to be Arab from the river to the sea. That's still a very powerful worldview by many of Israel's Arab citizens. But again, for the first time, you have an alternative, confident worldview. Some of Israel's most effective spokespeople these days, whether diplomats or on social media, are Arabs, because in many ways they expose a lot of the hypocrisy. They know what the conflict is about. They know that it's never been about what Israel did yesterday, and not even about the settlements or the occupation, that the conflict was fundamentally always about Arab anti-Zionism, about the rejection of the Jewish right to self-determination in any borders. As a result, they tend to speak more bluntly than any Israeli Jew or any Westerner even dares about what the conflict is about, what needs to change, about how anti-Zionism in the Arab world has certainly been a historical shiny mask for anti-Semitism, and therefore they also tend to call it out in Western spaces. So you're seeing now in many ways what's playing out more broadly in the Arab Islamic world of having these two battling narratives with respect to the idea of a Jewish state, also playing out within Israel. As a result, you have more Arabs who are volunteering to serve in the Israeli military, going up its ranks, saying, this is my country, this is my army, they defend my country. Again, this may not still be the majority, but it's a more confident group and it's having an impact.
What about the Palestinians in the Gulf, for example? Of course, there's a very large expatriate Palestinian diaspora in the Middle East. Do they adhere very much to a line taken by their brethren in Gaza and the West Bank, or are they now tilting more towards the sentiments of places like the UAE, Bahrain, Oman, and so on?
They're still very much Palestinian. Again, an Arab colleague of mine yesterday told me that there's almost this sense by Palestinians, oh, we actually built the UAE, almost a kind of tendency to look down on this country. But they, of course, when they're in the UAE and Bahrain, given the general sentiment right now, they're less vocal about it. And even they, I think in many ways, they're at the front lines of noticing the change. It's not that they've changed themselves, but they're seeing this confidence, this projection of a successful Arab future, of the embracing of Israel as part of that. And as much as they are clearly not liking it and wishing it to go away, they can't help but see it happening.
Another question deals with the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. I mean, have any of these countries usefully served, or is it too early, as interlocutors of any kind in reducing tensions or in attempting to mediate the conflict? Is that yet to come? Did it have any bearing, for instance, the Abraham Accords, that is, on last May's Gaza conflict?
So first of all, before, the Abraham Accords were based on Israel kind of chugging away any notion of annexing the West Bank, which again, for me, was a very important moment that definitely did not get noticed. About a year and a half ago, everyone was talking about how Israeli annexation of the West Bank, or at least a large part of it, was going to take place. I was part of a lot of panels, you know, big bad Israel gobbling land, annexing, what's going to happen. And I was a really awful panelist in all of these discussions because I kept on saying, I cannot convey to you the extent to which Israelis don't care. Like, so not a priority, so not important. And then the Emirati ambassador writes a beautiful op-ed in the Israeli paper saying, look, we're willing to normalize relations with you, but please don't annex anything. And of course, annexation is dropped like a hot potato, and Israel could not be any happier to have direct flights to Dubai, which really shows you, I mean, again and again, Zionism and Israel have been willing to trade land expansion for peace. Again and again, because the priority, as Ernst Bevin correctly analyzed, is a Jewish state. And if we can have that state live in peace, even if it's smaller, this is still the trade we're willing to make. So first, in the Abraham Accords itself, this already happened. And during the last May 11 days of fighting, this was really the first test of the Abraham Accords. And what you saw was interesting. In the first 2 days, when supposedly the conflict was about Jerusalem, my Abraham Twitter feed went silent. As soon as it became Hamas from Gaza, they were all over the place. They could not be happier to condemn Hamas and what Hamas is doing. And again, this goes to the broader vision of they represent a tolerant Islam against an extremist one, against Iran. So that fit very well. And that's it. This is by now ancient history. I know here sometimes people are still reeling from the impacts of May. Amazingly, in terms of the Abraham Accords, did not even leave a scratch. So I do think that the Gulf countries basically share this theory of peace, which says there is no use engaging right now directly in negotiations with the Palestinians as long as the Palestinian ethos remains fundamentally tied up with anti-Zionism. I think they understand correctly that if you bring more countries into the Abraham Accords, if you normalize the normalization, ultimately the Palestinians will be brought along. They did do things like not give funding to UNRWA, understanding again that it just extends the conflict, saying some very harsh words to Palestinians about essentially telling them, you know, we no longer need you as the vanguard of the civilizational battle against the Crusaders. We've supported you long enough. It's time for you to move on, get with the program, be a future-looking people. So they're doing those things, but I think they very wisely understand that pushing negotiations right now is not only what makes no sense, it's actually counterproductive.
I think we've got time at least for a couple of more questions. I'll just read this one. It's a very interesting question. I think an important one too. Is Jewish voice for peace, which is non-Zionist, anti-Jewish? I mean, so this is the question of how do we equate anti-Zionism with anti-Jewishness?
All right. Again?
Sorry, everything froze. I don't know if that was
okay.
Okay, it's back.
Okay, how do we equate? I'm assuming anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism?
Well, the question was, is Jewish voice for peace, which is non-Zionist, anti-Jewish? And how do we navigate the space between anti-Zionism and I'll say anti-Jewishness, but of course it is anti-Semitism.
Okay. So like I said, if you go historically, being against Zionism in the early 20th century was clearly part of a fierce Jewish debate about what's the best way forward for Jewish life. But that debate has broadly been settled within the Jewish world. And to be an anti-Zionist after the establishment of the State of Israel, yes, theoretically, you could still claim that it's part of an intellectual debate about the best way to be Jewish in the modern era. In effect, there is no space, there is no country, there is no society that has been anti-Zionist in the last 73 years that has been hospitable to Jewish life. So in many ways, I'm not even making the theoretical argument here, because the empirical part is just so powerful. Like I said, the Arab world, as soon as anti-Zionism became a central tenet, no Jews. Soviet Union, anti-Zionism becomes a central tenet, Jews suffer and ultimately leave as soon as they can. University campuses, Western spaces, the British Labour Party, they turn anti-Zionist, they're in practice inhospitable to Jews. So everyone is engaged in this splitting hairs argument of exactly, but all I'm saying is like in practice, when this happens, Jews are fleeing. So it just doesn't stand. Now, in terms of specifically organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, I believe they represent an even more troubling phenomena, which I've come to call the pound of flesh, which although Shakespeare reversed it, it's typically the Jews who are asked over to give over the pound of flesh in order to be accepted. The pound of flesh being a metaphor for some form of mutilation of their Jewish identity. Now, I think every Jew has this pound of flesh moment. I certainly had it when you believe your opinions are good enough to be accepted. And it used to be, you know, my opinion supporting two states, Palestinian statehood against the occupation, against settlement. That used to be good enough until I realized that the goalposts are constantly moving. And if that used to be good enough, not anymore. Now you have to engage in an exorcism ceremony against Zionism to prove that you're a good enough Jew. And you see on campus, it was enough to be just an AIPAC supporter of a two-state solution, and then to be on J Street, and then J Street U, and then if not now, and then Jewish Voices for Peace. And then if you're not the Jewish co-chair militantly of Students for Justice in Palestine, you're just not a good enough Jew. And I think a lot of Jews increasingly have this moment when they take a step back and they say, this is never going to end, right? You're always going to move the goalposts. It's never going to be enough. No amount of exorcism and self-mutilation are ever going to be enough. And many of them are stepping back and actually reclaiming Zionism, not as a movement to establish a state, we're good with that, but as an expression of a confident Jewish identity. And you have organizations now like Club Z and Zioness and the new Zionist Congress. And I mean, having Zionism in their name, because I think what they realized is that anti-Zionism, especially as it plays on campuses, is a form of bullying. It responds to the dynamic of bullying. And the more you try to appease it, the more it asks. But if you kind of stop and say, I'm a Zionist, and you cannot be shamed for that identity, the bullying in a way goes and looks for another target. So I think this is what's happening. It's a more troubling phenomena, but in terms of the greater question, there's no use splitting hairs. When organizations, societies, countries turn anti-Zionist, in a short while after, no Jews are there.
Okay, well, let me squeeze in one final question and then we'll let you go for the evening. This is unfortunately on the more pessimistic side, but perhaps realistic. Is there anything you think that could undo the Abraham Accords, or any particular threat that would really reverse the progress that you've described throughout this past hour that could reverse that or set us back?
Of course. And we can look at a lot of the scenarios and certain wars and something that has to do with Iran or America or who knows. So by no means am I saying that this is foolproof, done and over with, and now we can just glide into an optimistic future. This still has the elements of fragility. This is still new in the Arab world. I do think that it is more robust because it's not just about Iran. It is about a broader question of an Islamic identity, a successful Arab identity. So I think it's part of a bigger question. And in many ways, Israel is collateral success, if you could say, of this. But of course, a lot of things could reverse it. And in many ways, my pessimism and optimism come from the same place. Human ideas are reversible. Not easily, not quickly, but it is possible. So it is possible for an Arab and Islamic world to turn away from anti-Zionism towards the embrace of a sovereign state of the Jewish people in their midst. I believe it's possible. I don't think it's easy. I think it's remarkable that we're living through that. And of course, I personally hope that it will stand, but I am by no means arguing that this is irreversible. For good and for bad, all human endeavors are reversible.
Right. Well, that's a great ending and a very sobering one, but I think it's entirely realistic. Well, I know you've been a remarkably popular teacher this semester at Georgetown. We're going to miss you very much when you return to Israel. I think that this very memorable Goldman lecture only underscores how much our students have benefited from you, and we're very much in your debt and greatly honored that the CJC as well has been able to benefit from your ideas, your thoughts, and especially from this lecture. So thank you so much, and we hope you won't be a stranger to Georgetown in the future. We'll be coming back often, both virtually and in person as well. No, that's great. Thank you. Let me also thank my colleagues in the CJC, without whom none of this would be possible. Jocelyn Flores, Betania Michael, and Brittany Freed. So thank you for your efforts throughout this entire semester, not just, of course, to our students and to our faculty, but also to our many friends in the CJC, and for making this virtual lecture series both possible and I'll go out on a limb as director and say as successful as it's been. So thank you all to our attendees for joining us this evening. While this lecture marked our final public lecture of the fall 2021 semester, please stay up to date with CJC programming and with some previews of our public events and other types of programming next semester by going to the CJC website, cjc.georgetown.edu, and also by following us on Twitter at CJC_info. Dr. Wilf, thank you so much again. This was brilliant. We're really very much in your debt. And thank you everyone for attending. Everyone have an enjoyable and a safe Thanksgiving, and we'll see you all hopefully in person next semester. Bye-bye. Good night.